We're continuing our conversation with Hugh Hurwitz, the former director of the Bureau of Prisons. In the previous video, which I recommend that you watch it, you can click it by the link below or visit it in another area of our website. We spoke about the First Step Act and his experience in administering over the Bureau of Prisons during the implementation of the First Step Act, where you can learn about earned time credits, transitioning to home confinement, and many other interesting subjects that would help somebody who's going into the system. In this segment, I'd like to talk with him about designations and where a person serves his time and the different security levels of the Bureau of Prisons. Let's start, Hugh, by discussing the what happens after the judge sentences somebody to the custody of the Attorney General. How does that get moved into the Bureau of Prisons?
Sure. So the Bureau of Prisons places inmates in institutions, as you said, designations, right? That's the BOP terminology for deciding, where somebody is going to go and what facility they're going to go to, and that's based on a number of factors. They look at security level of the institution, security level of the inmate, right? So an inmate who's high security is going to go to they're not going to go to a low, right? They're going to go to a high security facility. And there's a process that BOP uses to classify the security level of an individual. And they go through that process, and that's considered in here. They look at a number of factors. They look at the PSR, and they look at the judgment order, the statement of reasons, a number of different things they get from the courts to help them make this assessment. A lot of the information comes out of the PSR that helps them with that, because that's usually a quite lengthy document. They strive to place individuals within 500 miles of home. In the last video, we talked about the First Step Act, and that was really emphasized in the First Step Act. So they want to put people within 500 miles of home. And that's not always possible. If you're a high security inmate, for example, and there's no high security facility within 500 miles of home, you're not going to be within 500 miles of home. Or maybe you need a particular program that isn't offered within 500 miles of home, so that you won't be. But they do their best to keep everybody within 500 miles of their home, because that facilitates connections with the community, facilitates connections with their family, and quite frankly, one of the biggest factors in reducing recidivism is that family and community connection. So that's really, really important to the best that they can. They consider your mental health and medical needs. Determine, do you need to go to a specific institution that has a higher level of mental health or medical care, or are you just have average type of medical and mental health needs? And then that opens up obviously more institutions available to you. Like I said before, they consider your programming needs and what programming is available at those institutions. They'll look at gang affiliation, right? We need to keep. They don't want to have too many gang members of a certain type at one institution. They also, certain gangs will be more likely to have disturbances if they're housed together. So they have to manage this gang population that they have. And then certain offenses like sex offenses can influence where somebody's placed, because sex offenders tend to be targets. And so they usually try and group them together at institutions where it'll be more safe for them. So again, there's just many, many, many different factors that goes into these placement decisions. This is handled by the Designation and Sentencing Computation Center. They're based down in Dallas, Texas, and they decide all the designations for everybody coming into the system, and for redesignations where people get moved from one institution to another. It all flows through that center. So they have a tremendous job to do down there.
Do the people at that designation center in Grand Prairie, Texas, do they have any interaction at all with the defendants or the individual's advocacy team, whether it's its defense attorney or family, or are they only looking at government documents to make an assessment?
They don't proactively reach out to defense teams and things like that. I do know that some attorneys and some defense teams or advocates have reached out to Grand Prairie to try and advocate for certain placements, and have reached out to question certain decisions. I don't know how successful they are, but people do try sometimes to influence that. At the end of the day, it's the BOP's discretion where somebody is designated, and that's usually not able to be challenged in the courts. So some people try and influence that, but it's certainly not something BOP is proactively doing.
There are a few documents that the court that follow a person after sentencing. One, as we've discussed, is the pre-sentence investigation report. A second is the judgment order that comes down at sentencing. And a third is the judge's statement of reasons. Do either of those three have more weight than one of the other, or are they all looked at with equal weight when Grand Prairie is assessing placement?
Yeah, I don't know that one has more weight than the other. I mean, the pre-sentence report usually has the greatest amount of information that's useful in the designation decisions. But I don't know that they would look at one with more or less influence over another. I do know that judges oftentimes will make a recommendation to BOP, and they will say, I recommend that this person needs a particular program, so send them to an institution that has that program. Or it would be good for this person to be at a particular institution because it's near their family or what have you. BOP will strive will always take very seriously the judge's recommendation. Again, as I said, judge's recommendations are not binding on BOP. It's the BOP's final call, but they do try hard when possible to comply with the judge's recommendation. Look, I mean, if the judge recommends that you go to a certain institution and there's a lot of gang members there that is a rival gang to your gang, it's probably not going to happen. If things like that. So judges may make a recommendation, but they won't have the full facts around that designation. So it may not always happen. But like I said, BOP does try very hard to seriously consider judicial recommendations.
So the takeaway there for anybody who is preparing to go to prison is really to learn as much as you possibly can about the custody and classification schedule. And we have courses on that for free on our website where you can learn what are the dynamic factors, what are the static factors, where are you going to score, and you can come with a pretty good idea. Second is get an understanding of the programs that are available in the different facilities. So you could perhaps make a case starting with the probation officer so it gets woven into the pre-sentence investigation report, why a specific institution might be appropriate to you, and then you should work with counsel perhaps to ask for that judicial recommendation, citing not only I want to get there because I'm going to miss my wife and kids, but rather because it's going to benefit you on your reentry path. And the more advocacy work you do on your own, I think the more you advance the possibility of getting to the institution where you can make the most progress. At least that's been our experience. Mm-hmm. One of the other questions I have is sometimes minimum security people and low security people, rather than being sent to a place that's closest to their home and a general institution where they have access to more programs, they go to a detention center and they don't understand why. Could you explain that decision that the Bureau of Prisons makes to send people to serve their sentences in detention centers rather than prisons?
Sure. So, excuse me. So detention centers, just to be clear what that means, detention centers are usually or mostly in metropolitan areas, and they're usually for pretrial or very short sentence inmates. Usually they're near the courthouse, so that they would be in a pretrial situation. It's easy for the marshals to move you back and forth to court for your trial. But detention centers also have work cadres of sentenced inmates, generally nearing the end of their sentence. Because of the pretrial nature of the inmates, they're not required to work. As a matter of fact, most of them can't because they're going back and forth to court every day. There's very little programming there because they don't have a need for the programming. So they need some group of sentenced inmates at the detention center to prepare food and to keep the place clean and to make sure that those sort of services are still available. So most detention centers have a small work cadre. These are sentenced inmates. and they try to keep them not only inmates nearing the end of their sentence, but ones that are going to release to that general area. Like I said, these are in metropolitan areas, so New York, Chicago, Miami, Houston, Los Angeles, San Diego, things like that. And so they are generally people from that area. Not always, right? Because there's various reasons for the designations, but that's generally what they try and do. And that's why someone might be at a detention center, because there's a need there to maintain the services, because the pretrial inmates can't do it.
If they are in that detention center, are they mixing with the administrative level with all of the other population, or are they serving their time with other like-minded or security level people that have the same security level?
So the work cadre is, first of all, the work cadre is usually lower security inmates because they oftentimes have access to outside the facility as well. And like I said, they're nearing the end of their sentence, which tends to be lower security anyway. And they, for the most part, don't mix with the pretrial inmates. They're housed in usually a different floor. They're housed in a different area, but there will be some mixing when they go onto the floor to deliver food or clean or what have you. So there may be some mixing going on, but generally they're kept separate.
Do they have access to the same types of programs that qualify them for earned time credits that exist in the regular prisons?
That, for the most part, no. There may be some programs available, particularly as they roll out. We talked about in the last video some tablets that are going to be available to BOP institutions, and so there's probably going to be programming available through that, more so than they have now. There's certainly some mental health programs available and treatment programs available, but the programming, the variety of the programming, the availability of the program will be far less because the cadre is just so small. They don't have the resources to provide that there. But doing the work that they're doing in the cadre, that job will earn them time credits. So they still have the opportunity to earn time credits there. Just the variety of the programming will be significantly less.
Does a case manager or a unit manager in all institutions, including a detention center, have discretion on, let's say I'm in an institution like the detention center and I don't have access to programs. I'm earning time credits for the work that I do, but perhaps I want to create a program in there like they used to have adult continuing education programs that a person could design. Would I have the ability to create a course, offer it as a volunteer effort and earn time credits from that? Would a local staff member have the ability to assess whether I'm earning those credits?
So first of all, it'll be obviously dependent on whether that local staff member is willing to work with you on this. But ultimately, in order for something to qualify to earn time credits, it has to be an evidence-based recidivism reducing program or a productive activity. And there's a process that BOP goes through to have those programs added. So if somebody were to develop a program in-house, which is possible, there's a form that's used, it's submitted through central office and is considered to be added to the catalog. So just by creating the program, that local institution case manager doesn't have the authority to say that's good for time credits. That program would need to be approved first. The
evidence-based part might be a very big hurdle, but the PA, you said that, what does that PA stand for again?
Productive activity. PA is productive activity. So most programs that are being created will start out as productive activities because, as you said, it's hard to prove that you have evidence that something's reducing recidivism until you've had that in place for a long time. So the EBRRs are much more intense programs, but they're also much more well-established programs. The productive activities haven't proven to show that they reduce recidivism, but I think the definition, they have to show that they're likely to reduce it, but you don't have to actually have evidence of it.
And so that's something that I would always draw hope from. Is if I were still in prison, and I used to create a lot of these kinds of programs, But at that time, there was no mechanism for anybody to get any type of credit. Now the mechanism exists, and for somebody who's serving a long sentence, you may be thinking about ways that you can contribute in a positive way and perhaps develop a relationship with a willing staff member who might sponsor the program as a PA. No guarantee it's going to work, but it's just another reason to work toward developing a positive record and to help you advance your candidacy for release when the time comes. And people that are serving 5 years, that's enough time to really develop that relationship and possibly get something along those lines. In the Bureau of Prisons, there are, well, unless it's changed, there are high security, medium security, low security, minimum security, and admin securities, which are all types, from the ADX to the SMUs, the special management units, to healthcare facilities and detention centers. Could you help us understand those different security levels that fall outside the general minimum, low, medium, and high?
Sure. So you named them. The ADX is a unique facility. It's called the administrative maximum. It's in Florence, Colorado, and that is Bureau of Prisons. I call Supermax, right? That's the one that ultimately replaced Alcatraz and Marion, where it's designed for security purposes, and it is designed to house the most violent and the most at risk inmates in the Bureau population. It's a small facility. Movement is very strictly controlled. Nobody, unlike other prisons, inmates aren't walking around. They are moved in handcuffs and leg irons by staff escorts. And their inmates mostly are in their cells for most of the day. They have an opportunity for recreation, either outdoors or indoors, but it's very limited. And it is what you'd consider, like I said, they're Supermax. The Boston Marathon bomber is there. Some of the 9/11 attackers are there. So the very, very most serious inmates are held at the ADX. But there are other types of administrative facilities. There are medical facilities, and we can talk separately about the medical facilities, but some have special medical units. The detention centers, we talked about detention centers, right? The detention centers house all security levels because they're pretrial inmates mostly, and we don't know what their security level is. If you're in pretrial, you might be there on a low-level drug offense or very high security terrorism charges. El Chapo was held in a detention center before he was sentenced, right? And during his trial. So, that's where people go for pretrial. So it's all levels of security. So that's why it's considered these administrative facilities, other than the ADX, generally house multiple security levels. And so they have to have some unique security concerns in order to address the different security needs that the different levels have.
Is there a difference between the special management unit, the SMU, and the ADX in the way that people serve their time?
Yeah, the SMU is a step down from the ADX, the idea is to process them out so they can get out into general population units. The ADX, people work their way up to. Now, people do come out of the ADX and come down, but oftentimes people go to the ADX because they've committed murders or other very serious crimes in other prisons. The SMU, this is similar, but it's not the same level of security that the ADX houses.
Many of the people watching the Prison Professors program are inside jails and detention centers waiting to get transitioned into the Bureau of Prisons. We distribute this through those tablets on various different types of tablets. And it's important for me to communicate this message to you that during the beginning part of my sentence, from the first 8 years, I was in a high security penitentiary and moved down to a minimum security camp. And one of the stops I had at the end was at the Florence camp. and I used to work in the ADX. And while I was working there, I used to see the names of the people there, and I saw a lot of people with whom I served time along the way that went to the ADX. So it's really important to think about what decisions you're making while you're going into the prison system, because every decision can have a relationship that's going to put you on a pathway to success or to really onerous conditions in something like an SMU or the ADX. So I would really encourage people to think about the First Step Act, learn about the ways that you can accelerate your pathway to success, and make decisions that will keep you out of the volatility and decisions that lead you into more troubling circumstances that could extend your time or put you in more volatile situations. At least that's my experience. My hopes are that people make decisions that allow them to come home successfully. Hugh, the healthcare is really important to a lot of elderly people that have specific healthcare needs. And I think the Bureau of Prisons designates certain institutions. They provide a wider contingency of staff members with medical experience. Could you tell us about those different institutions and what let's start off by describing the different healthcare level facilities.
Sure. So BOP has categorizes facilities and inmates by care levels. And so the most basic is a care level 1. Care level 1 facilities are usually house inmates that are generally healthy. They have limited medical needs that are easily managed by the clinician evaluations about every 6 months. So they'll see somebody every 6 months, and they really don't have very many issues. Because of that, those facilities can be located more than an hour from community medical centers because outside care is often not needed. You have to understand, Bureau of Prisons facilities, while they have great medical care, they don't have the breadth to be able to manage every single medical need that everybody has because there's just so much. So the care level 1s are really the most average, general, not medically needed, don't have many medical needs, generally healthy people. And that way they don't have to be near community facilities that they would have to send people out to often, because over an hour drive is a long time, and they don't have the resources to continue to do that. So care level 1 is the most basic. Care level 2 facilities are institutions that house stable, what they call outpatient inmates who require generally more clinical evaluations, usually quarterly or more often. Their medical conditions still can be managed through routine, regular scheduled appointments with their clinicians. So again, not having special high-level medical needs. The care level 2 institutions really don't have special capabilities beyond that of the health services staff that they ordinarily provide. But they are located within an hour of a major regional treatment center. So if there is a greater need for medical care, they have outside medical facilities that they can reach out to that allows them to get quicker attention, particularly in emergencies. Most BOP facilities are classified as level 2. Then you get to the level 3. Level 3 are facilities that handle inmates who are much more fragile. They require frequent clinical contacts. They may require special assistance with their activities of daily living. Maybe they need help bathing, dressing, eating. But we're not generally talking daily nursing care. Examples of these, though, would include inmates that they have cancer, that it's in remission for less than a year. They have advanced HIV. They might have congestive heart failure. These are your level 3 facilities. There's a handful of them in the country. Butner, North Carolina, Fort Worth, Terminal Island in California, Terre Haute, Indiana, Tucson, Arizona, Allenwood, Pennsylvania, and so there's a handful of those facilities. Then you get to the what the BOP calls the care level 4 facilities, and those are what they call, those are the Bureau of Prisons medical referral centers. They operate 6 of those. These are really Bureau of Prisons hospitals, for lack of a better word. They have significantly enhanced medical services. They're able to handle some inpatient care. And these are the ones that are handling the most severe inmates. And they're working also very closely with medical centers in the community. So the Federal Medical Center for Federal Prisoners is in Springfield, Missouri. They handle primarily higher security level inmates. They also have a full dialysis unit there and an inpatient medical unit. An inpatient mental health unit. FMC Rochester in Minnesota is affiliated with the Mayo Clinic, so they can do some really complex medical work there, and they also have an inpatient mental health unit. FMC Lexington is in Kentucky, and they generally handle the lower security inmates, but again, it's a hospital. And then there's FMC Devens in Massachusetts. They have a dialysis unit there and an inpatient mental health unit. They also have a residential sex offender treatment program there. Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina has an inpatient mental health unit, and they can manage care at all security levels there. And they are also the Bureau's cancer treatment center. So for the really severe cancer cases, they go to Butner, North Carolina. And then last is Federal Medical Center in Carswell, Texas. And that is exclusively a female facility. And it's the only medical center available for female inmates. So those are really the different care levels in the Bureau of Prisons.
And you'd said that both you put a care level on both the institution and the individual. Would the pre-sentence investigation report be the place that a person might start identifying his needs for care, or is that something that doesn't take place until a person goes into the Bureau of Prisons?
So it'll start with that pre-sentence report and any other information that the designators get. And obviously, if they see that somebody's in serious cancer treatment, they're probably going to be doing their best to send them to Butner. But once somebody comes into a BOP facility and they're assessed by the BOP medical staff, they will make recommendations for redesignation as appropriate. And so once they'll do their best with the information they have on the initial designation. But if it turns out somebody needs more or less care, they'll redesignate them once the BOP gets a chance to evaluate them.
Okay. This was during your previous response, you spoke for the first time, and it's my negligence in asking questions on female prisons. What is the difference in classification systems for female people and men? Women and men, I guess I'd say.
Women generally are, just as a population, lower security than men. They're prone to be less violent and less troublesome in that regard. BOP has, I think, some 20 facilities, including camps that house females across the country. Most of them are low security. They do have, I think, a couple medium security facilities, one in Hazleton, West Virginia. They do have, they had one female inmate who was on death row. She was housed at Carswell, and she was ultimately executed last year. I'm not aware that they have any other new females on death row. So that would be a unique situation, obviously. But for the most part, the females, are classified like the men, but they tend to be lower security inmates. They don't seem to usually have the violence that the men have.
Staying on this subject of designation and so on, there are a lot of course, people in America that are from foreign countries, and they get sentenced and they serve their time inside of a Bureau of Prisons facility. But there are a process that some of them can apply to go serve their sentence in their home country. Could you tell us about that process and what steps a person might take to qualify?
Sure. So there's a treaty transfer process. It's actually not managed by the BOP. It's managed by the Department of Justice and the Office of Enforcement Operations. They're the ones that have the final say as to whether somebody can be granted a transfer. The first step is you have to be eligible. You have to be a citizen or a national of a foreign country, and you have to be a citizen or a national of a foreign country that has a treaty relationship with the United States. So those things are all out of your control, right? Even if you're a citizen of a foreign country, they may or may not have a treaty relationship. So that's the first step. They have to have a treaty relationship. You can't have committed a military offense or a political offense. You cannot be sentenced to death. And you have to have at least 6 months remaining on your sentence at the time you make the request for a treaty transfer. There's also some different requirements for Mexican inmates. They can't be serving a sentence exclusively for immigration law violations, and they also cannot be serving a life sentence. If one feels that they're eligible and interested in applying for a treaty transfer, there's a transfer inquiry form. It's a BP A0297 that BOP uses. That gets submitted to your warden. The warden will review it. It'll get sent to central office, and then ultimately it'll get sent to the DOJ Office of Enforcement Operations, where they have the final say as to whether a treaty transfer will be granted.
And at what stage of a person's sentence is there any limitation that he has to serve so much time in the Bureau of Prisons before consideration? Or can he, you said 6 months before the expiration, but somebody serving a 10-year sentence, when might he apply?
I'm not aware of a limit on how long you have to be in the BOP facility, because you are going to serve in the rest of your sentence just in another country. I'm only aware of the 6 months. If you're nearing the end of your sentence, it's too late.
So a person could begin that application process right as soon as he gets to an institution, at least begin exploring it. Does the Bureau of Prisons make a recommendation one way or the other, or does it only report on the facts of the objective facts of the case?
Yeah, ultimately the BOP, I don't know if there's a form that BOP uses to recommend to OEO, but there's certainly communication with BOP and OEO about whether or not they think this would be appropriate. But at the end of the day, OEO has that final say.
Okay. And then one more, I want to go back to this question again, designation, because when somebody's on the residential reentry center or home confinement, they're still designated to the Bureau of Prisons, and they're still in custody. How does the Bureau of Prisons respond when somebody is working a request to work for a home-based business or for perhaps a family-owned business? Does the Bureau of Prisons take a position on that?
Sure. So, and especially today during the pandemic, there's a lot of people working from home. But yes, the BOP does allow people who are in home confinement or even in RRC to work from home, and now they need to be able to meet the requirements of the job. That can be somewhat challenging in an RRC, of course, because there's other people around, and the setups are more varied. But they can work from home, and they can work in a family business, whether it's from home or going out to work in that family business. That's generally allowed. The BOP obviously will look to make sure it's a legitimate business and those sort of things that you can be assured they will check it out. But yes, BOP does allow people to work in a family business and get a job there. Again, it's getting the job is the important part. So if they have that opportunity, BOP will support that.
So if the administrators in a halfway house are telling people that they don't allow them to work for family-owned businesses, what should somebody do? They
should ultimately, if they can't work it out with the halfway house there, then they should escalate that to the BOP through the administrative remedies process and contact the BOP because they should correct that.
But that's something the individual should do. He shouldn't have to hire an attorney. He should be able to simply make the presentation and show it.
Shouldn't have to hire an attorney is the operative word. Yes, that they should be able to do that. Obviously, it's 36,000 people in BOP. Sometimes you get somebody who's not going to look at the policy or not going to allow something that should be allowed. And then sometimes you need to bring in outside advocates. But yes, that should be something that an individual inmate should be able to advocate for himself on.
Hugh, I really want to thank you for spending this morning with us. We've recorded two rather lengthy interviews, and I suspect that I may have other questions later, and I hope that I'll be able to turn to you for those. But our goal with the nonprofit is just to help people learn how to help themselves, and you've certainly given us a lot of wisdom that people can use. Certainly would have helped me. We'll be publishing this on our website for freely available to anybody. And again, I just want to thank you for spending time with Prison Professors this morning.
Thanks very much. Great to be here, Michael.